The year 2025 has become a turning point for the United States. With Donald J. Trump back in the White House, the country finds itself navigating a fresh wave of economic and social turmoil. Soaring inflation, intensifying trade disputes, and a shaky labor market are shaping the daily reality of millions of Americans. But the question at the center of public debate remains: to what extent is Trump responsible for this crisis? Is he the chief architect of today's problems, or simply a player in a game that was already spiraling out of control? The economic landscape before 2025. To grasp today's crisis, one must first revisit the years leading up to Trump's return. From 2020 to 2024, the US economy slowly emerged from the shadows of the pandemic, but cracks in the foundation ran deep. Global supply chains, once considered robust, began to falter, crippled by delays, shortages, and skyrocketing costs. The Federal Reserve initially flooded the economy with liquidity to jumpstart growth, but efforts to control the resulting inflation were only moderately successful. At the same time, fierce global competition, especially from rising powers like China and India, put relentless pressure on American manufacturing and industrial output. The recovery, while real, was uneven and left key sectors exposed to the next shock. Trump's re-election ushered in a sharp pivot toward protectionist economic policies. Tariffs were reimposed or expanded on major imports to shield American industries from foreign competition, but the impact was immediate and more complex than expected. For companies with international supply chains, production costs soared. Many corporations, unwilling to absorb the losses, began relocating operations to cost-efficient countries like Mexico and Vietnam. This shift not only disrupted domestic manufacturing, but also pushed consumer prices higher, feeding the flames of inflation and eroding household purchasing power. What was meant to protect American industry ended up straining businesses and families alike. Trump's tariff offensive didn't just target China, it ruffled feathers across the globe, including among traditional allies. The European Union swiftly retaliated with its own tariffs, and German officials sounded the alarm over a potential global trade war. Washington's retreat from multilateral trade agreements further isolated the US on the world stage. This vacuum left room for new economic alliances to rise, particularly the BRICS bloc: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, which began challenging the West's dominance and redrawing the global economic map. Domestically, the fallout from these policies was felt most sharply in America's industrial and rural heartlands. In the Midwest, where factories are lifelines for entire communities, layoffs surged and plant closures became common. Farmers suffered as key markets like China scaled back their imports of American agricultural goods, driving many operations to the brink. In the tech sector, companies cut back on investment and shifted jobs overseas, triggering a wave of white-collar layoffs. Unemployment began to spike in specific regions, breeding resentment and deepening social divides. As the crisis escalated, Washington became a battleground of conflicting visions. Democrats sharply criticized Trump's protectionist agenda, calling it outdated and economically damaging. They pushed for alternatives centered on infrastructure renewal, clean energy, and tech-driven innovation. Some moderate Republicans expressed concern over the unintended consequences, but party leadership doubled down on the president's hardline approach. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve attempted to tame inflation through a series of interest rate hikes, but these measures also cooled consumer demand and stifled investment, slowing the broader economy. The political gridlock only worsened the economic uncertainty. Public sentiment mirrored the chaos in Washington. Polls reveal a country increasingly skeptical of its institutions and sharply divided on the causes and cures of the crisis. Trump supporters view his actions as a necessary correction to years of economic decline, praising his efforts to restore American sovereignty. Critics, on the other hand, blame him for deepening inflation and undermining global relationships that once benefited the US economy. Media coverage, split along ideological lines, has amplified this polarization, turning debate into conflict and reducing space for meaningful dialogue. While Trump's policies have certainly influenced the current economic trajectory, it's important to recognize the deeper structural issues that predate his return. America has long struggled with an aging workforce, chronic underinvestment in research and innovation, and heavy dependence on overseas supply chains. These vulnerabilities have been building for decades, decades. Protectionist policies may have accelerated the symptoms, but they did not cause the disease. Experts from across the political spectrum now agree. The US needs a comprehensive reform strategy that embraces long-term innovation, workforce development, and global competitiveness. The road ahead is uncertain, but not without options. America's future will hinge on how policymakers strike a balance between protecting domestic industries and staying open to global trade. Investments in infrastructure, renewable energy, and next-generation technologies could help revitalize the economy if implemented wisely. Meanwhile, rebuilding trust with international allies and re-engaging in strategic partnerships will be essential in a world where economic power is increasingly multipolar. Analysts warn that continued isolationism could leave the US trailing its global competitors, both economically and diplomatically. To lay the blame for today's economic turmoil solely at Donald Trump's feet would be an oversimplification. Yes, his policies have intensified certain dynamics, but they emerged against a backdrop of long-standing vulnerabilities and shifting global realities. Whether this crisis becomes a prolonged downturn or a moment of national reinvention depends on what comes next. Can America rise above political divisions? Will it embrace bold reforms and reclaim its innovative edge? For millions of Americans, the answer can't come soon enough. Their hope lies not just in recovery, but in the emergence of a stronger, fairer, and more resilient economic future.